Alongside Photoshop CS5's amazing new features, Puppet Warp can definitely be added to that list. After playing around with Puppet Warp for a few days, when used correctly, it can be a very handy tool. However, this tool will not always work with all types of images. Typically, the subject that you want to edit should be on a transparent layer in order for Puppet Warp to work well. Now luckily, Photoshop CS5 has also released some handy tools to allow for more accurate object extraction, such as the improvement to refine edge and content-aware fill. In the photo in front of us, I would love to be able to bend and twist the snake around my wife's neck. I just realized that sounds terrible. What I meant is bend and twist the snake that's around my wife's neck. I need to look this over before I do this next time. Anyways, continuing. This would make for a very tedious edit in previous versions of Photoshop, but let's take a look at how it would be done in CS5. Now, like I mentioned, Puppet Warp works best if your layer is on a transparent background. So we're going to have to extract our subject. Using the Quick Selection tool, I've already gone ahead and made a selection. Now we can hop into Refine Edge to make a fairly accurate extraction. I'm going to make sure to turn on Smart Radius and adjust a few settings to get that result that I'm looking for. Making sure that New Layer with Layer Mask is selected, I'm going to click OK. Now that our subject is on a separate layer, we need to remove the subject from the original layer. In CS5, instead of cloning for an hour and a half, we're going to use Content-Aware Fill to get the job done. Let's hide our new layer and select the original. Perform a Command or Control if you're on a PC, click on the extracted layer to create a selection. Now I found that in order for Content-Aware Fill to work well, it needs a little bit of breathing room. To do that, let's head to Select, Modify, and then Expand. I'm going to use a value of around 20, but depending on the size of your image, yours may be larger or smaller than mine. And now for the magic. Hold down Shift and press Delete to open our Fill dialog box and select Content Aware. Press OK and wait for Photoshop to remove your subject. Now the result isn't perfect, but for what we need it for, it's more than fine. Now for the subject of this video, Puppet Warp. Revealing the original layer again, let's head to Edit and then click Puppet Warp. Right away you'll see that our subject has been assigned a mesh. Now depending on the complexity of your edit, you can choose the density of the mesh. Fewer points, normal, or more points. For this example, we're just going to stick with normal. We can also adjust whether the mesh is tight around our subject or if it has a bit of room around the edges. And of course, we can choose whether we see or do not see the mesh. In order to achieve a nice warp, we need to set some pins around our subject. Some will be to lock the subject in place, and some will be for the rotation points. The pins that I add to the snake will act as rotation and movement points, and then I'll need to add some pins around the edges of my subject to lock it in place. Now, as you're about to see, if I didn't add the additional pins, we would get some pretty funky warping, but we don't want that, so that's why we're going to add some pins around the subject. Once you have the pins in place, you can either drag a pin to begin warping, or hold down Alt or Option to rotate the area. At this point, the snake is behind my wife, but what I really want is the snake to be up in front. Now at the top, we can choose the depth of our pins. Clicking the first icon, you'll notice that the snake pops right to the front. Very, very cool. Once you've done all your warping, accept the changes to apply the warp to your project. There's a lot that can be done with Puppet Warp, but again, it has to be used properly to achieve decent results. Try it out yourself in Photoshop CS5.